Okay, good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome to my presentation. So my name is Natalie. I'm a PhD student here in the Visual Project, and I'm based in Trinity College Dublin in Ireland. So today I'll be talking a bit about my PhD research, which focuses on using behavioral insights to increase older adults' acceptance of camera-based active and assisted living technologies. So as I'm sure many of us here are familiar with, camera-based active and assisted living is theoretically interesting and important, but practically complex and challenging. So although it's important to conceptualize and develop these technologies, it's equally or perhaps even more important to ensure that they're actually used by older adults. And this transition from the technology being in development to being in use is complicated by non-acceptance of the technology on the part of older adults. So these are just some of the many quotes from older adults who are hesitant about or who are outright against using the technology. So some say they don't like it because they feel like they're being watched. Others just think that the whole thing is terrible. So what this suggests is that without intervention, these technologies may not hold much potency for delivering on the aging in place agenda. And so it's in this gap between the technology being in development to being in use that my research is situated. So specifically, it looks at combating this issue of non-acceptance. And more specifically, the aim of my research is to use behavior change theory to understand how best to facilitate acceptance of these technologies and to locate, understand, and validate mechanisms of action, which are essentially the pathways through which interventions can increase acceptance of these technologies. So the focus on behavior change is because this is essentially what my research is trying to do, which is to move older adults from a position of not accepting and using the technology to a position of willingly accepting and using it. And to do this, what we need is an intervention that's designed to target and change behavior, in this case, to target and change acceptance of these technologies. So to develop effective behavior change interventions, it's important to understand why a particular behavior exists. So in this case, why older adults do or do not accept these camera technologies, which then helps us understand what works to change behavior, and importantly, how does it work to change behavior. And this is where the focus on mechanisms of action comes in. So mechanisms of action can be simply understood as the causal processes through which an intervention affects behavior. So in our case, again, acceptance of these camera technologies. And so targeting these mechanisms of action is what's needed to produce the desired behavior change and to increase acceptance of these technologies. So to achieve this aim of increasing acceptance, my research takes a structured approach that consists essentially of 4 sequential steps. So first, I needed to identify the mechanisms that underpin acceptance and that could then be targeted in interventions designed to increase acceptance of these technologies. So for example, as I suppose a simple analogy, if not having the skills to use the technology makes older adults less likely to accept the technology, then skills is a potential mechanism through which interventions could increase acceptance. The second step is to measure the mechanism, which lets us test whether it's related to the behavior that we're interested in. So for instance, we would measure the level of skill that people have for using the technology in order to see whether this contributes to their acceptance of the technology. The final third and fourth steps occur simultaneously, and these involve essentially manipulating the mechanism to see if this causally leads to the desired behavior change. For example, we could develop an intervention to increase people's skills for using the technology and then test whether this intervention then increases acceptance by increasing their skills. So in the first step, again to reiterate, I needed to identify the mechanisms associated or underpinning acceptance of camera-based AL technology. And so to do this, I conducted a scoping review that aimed to answer the research question, what are the barriers and facilitators to older adults' acceptance of these technologies? And so through a comprehensive search of the key electronic databases and the grey literature, I found 47 studies that revealed an equal number of barriers and facilitators to acceptance of these technologies. So for reasons that will become clearer hopefully later on in the presentation, I won't go through all 47 barriers and facilitators. I think Tamara spoke quite comprehensively about them just earlier. So instead I wanted to bring your attention back to two barriers in particular that really piqued my interest, I suppose. So the first barrier was what we eventually called a perceived lack of current need for the technology. So as you can see in the quotes on the left, older adults tended to say that they wouldn't use the technology now and would only use it in the future when they needed it. And this is a bit counterintuitive because many camera-based AL technologies, and I think especially the more sophisticated intelligent devices, are now designed as long-term preventive measures for health self-management, meaning that older adults are more likely to reap the benefits of the technology if they were to use it now rather than wait until their condition deteriorated in the future. And the other barrier was something we called the self-other distinction in perceived need for the technology. So this essentially reflects a tendency for older adults to say that they wouldn't personally need or use the technology now, but they could see other people benefiting from it. So these findings led me to focus on a psychological construct which I thought could explain why older adults don't feel like they need the technology immediately or personally, and that could therefore represent a mechanism that interventions could target to increase acceptance. So this construct is called future self continuity, which essentially refers to how psychologically connected we feel to our future self. So it's quite well established in the literature that future self continuity varies as a function of time, meaning that we often feel more connected to ourselves of today or tomorrow than, say, ourselves in 10 years' time. So there are three main components to future self continuity. So we often feel more connected to our future selves if we see them as similar to our current self. And also if we see them, if we can imagine them vividly in, I suppose, our mind's eye. And also if we feel positively rather than negatively towards them. So another thing that's well documented in the literature is that future self-continuity has large and important effects on behavior. So for example, it's been shown that people with low future self-continuity tend to behave in ways that don't necessarily benefit their future. So for example, they save less for retirement, they exercise less, they smoke more, they fail to plan for their careers, and so forth. And the reason behind this behavioral impact can be summarized in this quote by Hirschfeld, which states that if individuals consider their future selves as different people, they may have no more reason to reward their future self than to give resources to strangers. And so what this suggests is that a person who doesn't feel connected to their future self may not act in ways that benefit their future self simply because they care less about their future self. And so I thought that this thinking might help to explain why older adults are not accepting or hesitant to accept these camera-based technologies. And this, I thought, is because we can consider the act of using these technologies today as an act that rewards the future self. So, for example, by way of increasing the well-being, the independence, health, and longevity of the future self. Whereas a lot of the costs of the technology tend to accrue more so to the present self. So things like violating the present self's privacy, subjecting the present self to the stigma of assisted living, and also, of course, the actual monetary costs of the technology. So we might then hypothesized that older adults who don't feel connected to their future self may, because they care less about their future self, then be less accepting of the technology today. And so this is what I set out to test in my next study, where I use a cross-sectional online survey-based study to answer the research question, what is the association between future self continuity and older adults' acceptance of camera-based AL technologies? And so consistent with our hypothesis, we found that older adults who saw their future selves in more vivid detail and also who felt more positively towards their future selves were more accepting of the technology. And in fact, they were approximately 3 times more likely to say that they would be willing to install the technology in their home or in their own homes if they scored higher on the measures of future self continuity. And so what this suggests is that interventions that increase the vividness and or the positivity with which older adults see their future selves may help to increase acceptance of these technologies. So returning to our behavior change analogy from earlier, we start to see how the results of the scoping review and the survey study help to answer the first why question when developing behavior change interventions. So a partial reason that older adults are hesitant to accept the technology is because they see their future selves either negatively or in unclear or sort of colorless terms, and may therefore fail to appreciate sort of the long-run benefits of the technology for their future selves. So with this, I had the grounds then to move forward with the next stage of the research, which was to develop an intervention to help older adults envision their future selves more vividly and positively. And so in brief, the intervention was a question and story exercise where older adults would answer a few questions about their futures and their future selves. So for example, questions like, what would you like to do more of in the future? Where would you like to live and why? And then their answers would then pipe into a personalized story about their future and their future selves, which they would then read out loud. So the idea was that by getting older adults to contemplate their future selves more deliberately, they would be better able to vividly envision their future selves and may in fact also feel more positively towards these future selves. And then just to clarify, it was an online intervention, and so could be delivered using a desktop or tablet computer. Next, I evaluated the intervention with older adults to make sure that it fit their needs and preferences. And so to do this, I ran semi-structured interviews with older adults and asked about their experience of using the intervention, what they liked and didn't like about it, and if they had any recommendations to improve it. And so overall, the intervention was seen as usable, acceptable, engaging, and relevant. And this is illustrated, I think, in these quotes. So for example, older adults said that they liked that the intervention was simple and very easy to understand. They liked that it challenged them to think, but that they were also given a space to tell their own story. And importantly, also the intervention hit on all the things that people would be thinking about when they're thinking about growing older and their future older self and so forth. So having adapted and optimized the future self intervention, I then had the grounds to move forward with the next step of the research, which was to test whether and how the intervention affected acceptance of camera-based AL technology. So the research question was, does a future self intervention increase acceptance, and if so, how? To answer this question, I ran an online randomized controlled study. So we recruited an online sample of older adults and basically randomly allocated them to a control no intervention group or an intervention group where they underwent the future self intervention. And next, all the participants then completed validated measures of future self continuity and then also reported on a few antecedents to acceptance, so things like privacy concerns, perceived usefulness and attitude towards these technologies, before finally reporting on their acceptance of the camera-based AL technology. And then so to very quickly summarize the most important results of the study, we found that the intervention did affect acceptance in the hypothesized direction, but interestingly only in a specific demographic group. So acceptance was significantly higher in the intervention compared to the control group, but only in older adults aged 65 and below. So this is what we see when we look at the blue line on the graph here. And then so the between group difference was not significant in those aged 65 and above, which we see on the green line, which suggests that the intervention did not produce the intended effects in the older age group. And then, so as a subsequent statistical test, I was interested to see whether the intervention had its effects on acceptance, specifically by affecting future self-continuity. And to do this, I ran a mediation analysis, taking only the data from the demographic group that was affected, so those aged 64 and below. So what we found, again, confirmed our hypothesis. So essentially, what the model here shows is that relative to the control group, participants in the intervention group, random allocation to the intervention group significantly increased how positively older adults felt towards their future self, which then led to increased acceptance of the technology. And so what the results here managed to, the result essentially managed to isolate future self-continuity and more specifically positivity towards the future self as the mechanism underpinning the effectiveness of our intervention, at least among those aged below 65 years. So again, returning to our behavior change analogy from earlier, the findings help to add to the analogy. So having identified one reason why older adults are hesitant to accept the technology, here a lack of future self-continuity, we then went on to show that what works to increase acceptance, or at least one way to increase acceptance, is a future self intervention designed to prompt more vivid and positive thinking of the future self. And then more than that, we show precisely how the intervention works. So specifically, it helps older adults experience their future selves in more positive terms. Presumably, this helped to increase acceptance because by feeling more positive towards the future self, older adults then cared more for the future self, and then in that way, they sort of placed greater weight on the valuation of the benefits of these technologies for their future self. And so, just I suppose a brief summary to the research. So aligned to the established methodology for changing behavior, my research used a series of sequential studies to try and increase older adults' acceptance of these technologies. So first, scoping review identified a whole range of barriers and facilitators to acceptance, two of which led me to focus on the concept of future self-continuity as a potential mechanism that could be targeted in an acceptance facilitating intervention. We then measured and then established a significant association between future self-continuity and acceptance, which then gave us the grounds to then develop a so-called future self-intervention to hopefully target acceptance and increase it. We then tested the intervention and found that it was effective at increasing acceptance of the technology, but curiously only in those aged below 65 years. Finally, I'd like to just briefly summarize my research and discuss its implications. So we managed to identify future self-continuity as a novel mechanism that at least partially explains older adults' acceptance of camera-based AAL technology. And these findings are interesting because they help expand our understanding of the factors that influence acceptance of camera-based AAL beyond those factors that have been typically studied in the traditional technology acceptance literature. So beyond factors like perceived usefulness and ease of use of the technology. And this expanded understanding allowed us then to develop a novel way to intervene on acceptance by targeting future self-continuity. And I feel like this is valuable because our question and answer intervention is practicable and also feasibly implemented in a range of contexts that I suppose would be relevant to AAL. So for example, we might imagine it being used in online materials advertising the technology to older people. It could also potentially be used by healthcare practitioners in consultation with their older adult patients potentially when they're introducing or recommending the technology to them. In terms of future research, because we found that our intervention only worked in the younger old, it would be important for future studies to explore why this was, and more so, I suppose, explore other means of intervening on future self-continuity or acceptance that could work for older adults on the whole. A potential strategy would be to target future self vividness rather than positivity, because we did find that this vividness component of future self continuity was correlated with acceptance for older adults across all ages. And then finally, our findings help to inform the development of other types of interventions. So although we used a question and story exercise in this specific application, there could be other unexplored ways to increase future self-continuity that may benefit older adults' acceptance of camera-based AAL tech, or indeed AAL tech or tech in general. So these would be interesting to look at to expand the scope of interventions that could be used to increase acceptance, which to date are limited. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thanks very much for your attention.
Okay, any questions? David.
Thanks. I just wondering about if you'd had, you use this term young or old to kind of affect anybody that's 64 or under. And, I'm just wondering about, have you kind of looked at your data in relation to, say, 5-year age categories, or kind of something a bit more granular, and maybe kind of analysed it in relation to those age categories, as well as things like socioeconomic data, quite interesting class, or cultural differences that would kind of have an effect upon this, the outcomes you got.
Yeah, I think, no, that's a very good point, I think, and thank you for bringing that up. I think the reason I looked at sort of the 10-year gap in measuring future self-continuity was because that was what the original scale was developed for, and they asked about this 10-year gap. But in thinking about, so once I looked at the data showing that it really didn't have much, or the intervention didn't have much of an effect on the older old, so those aged above 65, I thought maybe that could be one reason why. So looking at, or getting people of an older age to sort of imagine themselves 10 years into the future may be a bit unrealistic, and that could potentially be a reason why the intervention didn't work in those of a higher age or a higher age category. So yeah, I think that's a very valid point, and something that would be interesting to look at in future studies.
Any other questions? Everyone very tired. Natalie, I mean, this is fantastic work. We've discussed this before. What do you think of the ethical sort of considerations for the use of these type of interventions moving forward?
Yeah.
To manipulate.
No, thanks very much for that question. I think one thing that I suppose is good to keep in mind is that in a way, the way the research is framed is very, it's directed at this aim of getting people to increase their use, and almost like a black and white thing of accepting the technology. I think there is an ethical discussion there to be had about whether it's valid to actually intervene on their acceptance of these technologies. But I think the advantage of this intervention is that it doesn't really necessitate them, or I suppose force them to accept the technology in one way or another. It's more so sort of encouraging older adults to think more about their futures and sort of the potential way, think about how their actions today might affect their behaviors or their health and their well-being in the future and things like that. So in that way, it doesn't really confine them to acting in one way or another, but it gives them more, I suppose, costs and benefits to think about, and I think that's justifiable. Yeah.
Vividness.
Yeah, exactly.
For a long
Yeah.
time, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. And also, just then you raised the point about some ethical issues that need to be considered, because obviously there's the issue about the extent to which behaviour change is a matter of persuasion, coercion, or in some context even compulsion, when someone moves into an institutional setting, for instance. And then one of the other questions that arises is on whose behalf are you or we seeking behaviour change?
Yeah.
Because there are plenty of purveyors of technologies out there who want to promote behaviour change, to buy their products, to use their products for commercial reasons, as opposed to motivations that are directly concerned with people's own personal well-being and so forth. So just really wondered if you wanted to just give an initial thought about that. And with regard, by the way, to the activities of commercial organisations, not forgetting that we have got technologies that are designed in a particular kind of way, and maybe some of the argument for behaviour change should be one about behaviour change for the purveyors of the technologies, the designers of the technologies, to make them more usable, more intuitive and all the rest of it. And of course to pick up on some of the things we've discussed today about maintaining people's privacy and things like this. Sorry, that was a bit of a statement, but
No worries. Yeah, I think I got the question there, and yeah, thanks very much for bringing that up. I suppose my candid answer is that the thrust of my project, I suppose, it works, I think, on behalf of the technologists and the developers and the deployers of these technologies, because it's really trying to get older adults to be more open to using these technologies, if not just accepting the technologies and using them. So I think, yes, I do have, or my research at least, takes a bit of a more biased stance where it really tries to push these technologies to older people. But I think a way that the intervention bypasses this, maybe a bit of the ethical dilemma, is that, again, it, rather than really talking about, in fact, the questions contained in this future self-intervention don't mention the camera-based AL technologies at all. Rather, they get older adults really to think about just their life in general in the future, which I feel like is something that is quite a normal thing to do. So maybe in that way where it doesn't really bring up the issue of camera-based AL technology, and that it only sort of touches on the more generalizable aspects of their future life, that could be a way to sort of bypass those ethical issues. Yeah.
That's a good response. It actually ties into some work we've done previously, looking at the role of assistive technologies and people knowing what's actually out there, what's available to use, and how it would benefit them if they used it. There's a lack of information, particularly for families, and you mentioned caregivers particularly. And I was going to, in slide 15, I think you done the review of, you did that kind of exercise looking at really what identifying the need for technology. And they said they wanted it. Within your work, did they identify what technology specifically they wanted? Or did they understand what they wanted?
Yeah, that's a good point. In my scoping review or user studies?
It was the second step of your research, second research question.
Second research question.
It was with the users, the scope, it was with the first qualitative piece you done.
Yeah, so the care management and
Yeah, care
what they
management,
want.
yes.
Yeah, so they know what they want to happen. For example, the facility workload to be diminished, but they don't know which way, which technologies would offer that. So yeah, they, at least in Spain, they didn't know what is out there, but they know what they want, but how they.
So it's almost looking at providing that information, but also in the context of what you're trying to do is trying to visualize that in the future, but ethically, in an ethical context.
Yeah, that's why the Alplis scale came, because we wanted to know how much people know about these technologies, and then that's continued with a book, a handbook, that we are preparing in Good Brother that the title is going to be like 50 questions about AEL. So that is based originally in the scale, in the questions that we had in the scale, answering them, so that people could get literacy on AEL, and there are questions about, or questions and answers about AEL technologies, what is available, how you can get them, about privacy, about legal aspects, about cost, about... We are finishing the selection of the 50 questions because we propose, I think, around 100 questions that could be answered. So that's, everything is related to that. Yeah.
Okay, it's nice to see that link between the two studies, what we could do in the future. Anyway, I think everyone wants to go home at this point, get freshened up, get something to eat. So thank you very much, Tamara. Thank you, Natalie. And thank you, Paco, for today as well. It's been fantastic. So we'll wrap it up, Roy.